During the Middle Ages, both laws and the penalties for breaking them were very different from the ones we are familiar with today. From football being illegal to being forbidden to eat food for more than 2 times a day, here are 8 weird laws from the Middle Ages that thankfully do not exist today. Playing football was illegal. While football players today have a reputation of being dramatic over the smallest of injuries, their predecessors were the exact opposite. Medieval football was a violent game. While there were not as many rules, there was a lot more bloodshed. Rather than a ball, an inflated pig's bladder was kicked up and down the entire length of a village, with the goals sometimes miles apart. Players could kick and punch both the bladder and their opponents, resulting in many injuries and the occasional death. Football was banned in 1349 by Edward III. Edward III wanted his remaining healthy men to be focused on their archery practice rather than getting distracted by football. The punishment for playing football was 6 days imprisonment. Blowing nose was illegal. Newmarket, located in the English county of Suffolk, is regarded as the birthplace of horse racing. The practice dates back to the 12th century, but James I popularised it after constructing a palace there in 1606, which attracted a large number of visitors. Horse racing in Newmarket grew into a significant business over time, forcing the city to pass laws to safeguard the horses, including one that made blowing one's nose in the street unlawful. This was done to lessen the chances of the horses getting sick. What a misery it must have been for those with hay fever. Blowing one's nose was not the only thing that may get a person in trouble. Anyone walking around with a head cold or temperature had to pay a fine. Obviously, horse racing was a serious business. You need your master's permission to get married. Today, asking your partner's father for their child's hand in marriage is frightening enough. While this procedure is done out of respect, the answer provided does not determine your destiny, and you can still marry even if the father does not grant his blessing. This was not the situation in the Middle Ages. In medieval times, societal position was extremely important, particularly for individuals at the bottom of the pyramid. Peasants and serfs who worked and lived for landowners had practically no independence. A man who wanted to marry had to gain approval from both his father and his landowner. For a woman, the situation was even worse. If her husband died, the landowner could force them to marry another man in a relatively short amount of time. If they refused, they could receive punishment. People could not eat more than 2 courses. During the Middle Ages, there were numerous sumptuary regulations that limited what people might eat and drink. They were designed to discourage excessive eating and keep those of lesser social position from adopting the lives of those above them. In 1336, a law was passed prohibiting persons of all ranks from being offered meals consisting of more than 2 courses. It specified that the soup was a full course meal rather than merely a sauce. The law made an exception for some events, like as Christmas, when 3 courses were permitted. Playing tennis was forbidden. Football wasn't the only sport banned in the Middle Ages. In 1485, it became illegal for young men who weren't nobles to play tennis, with the only exception being on Christmas Day. Medieval tennis was believed to disrupt labour and encourage gambling in workers because participants were left in unsupervised situations without their masters around. The banning of tennis in the lower classes helped to maintain the feudal hierarchy. Tennis began to be seen as an exclusively upper-class sport because it needed expensive equipment and required an understanding of complex rules and social etiquette. Tennis eventually became known as the sport of kings, with Henry VII and Henry VIII both apparently very into the game. A Venetian ambassador who watched Henry VIII play in his youth said, "It was the prettiest thing in the world to see him play, his fair skin glowing through a shirt of the finest texture." Thankfully today, tennis can be played by all. Blasphemy resulted in the loss of one's tongue. In the Middle Ages, people had to watch their tongues, both physically and metaphorically, to avoid breaking the religious law regarding blasphemy, the action of speaking ill about God or sacred things. The medieval Catholic Church established the law to maintain power and order. Blasphemy was considered a serious crime by the Church, and it was punished accordingly. Blasphemers faced heavy penalties. Frequently, a person would be chained and tied while their tongue was pulled out with hot pliers, rendering them mute for the remainder of their life. Other punishments include stoning and hangings. Commit a crime. Go through an ordeal. During the Middle Ages, the peasants were strong in numbers. To maintain their rule and prevent revolts, upper-class officials made even small crimes punishable by heavy punishments. The objective was to make those who were poor afraid of stepping out of line. Even small crimes like stealing, disturbing the peace, which often meant the king, may result in cruel punishments ranging from flogging to having a bodily part severed, with hands being particularly popular. Until 1215, simply being accused of a crime resulted in the punishment of suffering an ordeal that revealed a person's innocence or guilt. There were 3 ordeals. 1. Ordeal by fire. The accused held a red-hot iron bar in their hands and walked 3 meters. After 3 days of being bandaged up, the wound on the hand would be looked at to determine the accused's fate. If it was healing, they were innocent. If it wasn't, they were guilty. 2. Ordeal by water. The accused was tied up and thrown into a body of water. If they sank, they were innocent. If they floated, it was seen that the river had not accepted them, and therefore they were guilty. 3. Ordeal by combat. This was combat between the accused and accuser. It was believed that God would give strength to the innocent. It must be noted that the fight often ended in the loser's death. The practice of ordeals was declared over by the Pope in 1215 and was replaced by a jury process. Wearing long, pointy footwear was illegal. Curator's choice, medieval Poulin shoe. The 15th century in Britain was a flamboyant period. Along with short shirts, long, pointy-ended shoes known as cracos or pikes had become the pinnacle of male fashion. It was thought that the longer the toe, the more masculine and wealthy the wearer. Hence, shoes might sometimes extend up to 5 inches beyond the toe. As a result, the ends were frequently tied around the wearer's ankles. As fashion evolved and peasants began to dress more lavishly, the English king decided to interfere. They wanted to maintain the feudal structure and prevent people from clothing above their social status. Between 1463 and 1604, a law was issued stating that no knight under the rank of lord, esquire, or gentleman, nor any other person, shall wear any shoes or boots having spikes or points which exceed the length of 2 inches. The punishment was a fine of 3 shillings and 4 pence, or about over 136. So here were 8 ridiculous laws from the Middle Ages that thankfully no longer exist today. If you liked this video, then do make sure to subscribe to my channel Medieval Mind and watch my other videos as well. I shall be very thankful to you for this.